Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna...
Okay, welcome back, all you citizens of the world. It's live from the Heartland for the week of August 29th. And I still am Michael James up here in Chicago's Blue 49th Ward. And my next guest is no stranger to the show. It's one of my favorite pals, the one and only Rus Bradburd. Rus is back from Ireland, where he was working on his latest and newest book on a Fulbright grant. He's taken his daughter Alma off to college, and as usual, while he's here in Chicago, he's playing the fiddle, meeting up and caring for his friends before heading back to New Mexico. So good morning to you, Rus, and thanks for joining us.
It's good to be back, Mike. Thanks. And it's a beautiful day in Chicago.
It's a beautiful city, and it's a place we don't want any federal troops coming in or National Guard. And that said, let's talk about your trip to Ireland this summer. What have you been doing over there?
Well, I was in Belfast a couple of years ago on a Fulbright fellowship to work on a book. So I've been going back each summer to try and finish it. And the premise of the book, Mike, you'll find it interesting, is there's been Northern Ireland, Belfast, of course. So it's technically part of the UK. But there's a phenomenon there where the refugees are coming in from Syria, Sudan, and Ukraine, and then later Ukraine, once the war started there. And the parents are sticking their kids into Gaelic sports, traditional Gaelic sports, which are Gaelic football and a sport called hurling, which is like a stick and ball game. And they're ancient Irish sports. And so it's a funny thing to see, there's young women out there in hijabs. And, you look at the team roster and there's, Liam Kelly and Sean O'Flaherty and then Muhammad Akbar. Well, that's unusual. And so it's a very profoundly Irish sport. It's played a little bit in Chicago at Gaelic Park and a little bit in New York and Boston and a little bit in Australia, but it's mostly an Irish sport. The most popular sports in Ireland are Gaelic football and hurling. And just as maybe your great-grandfather did, if your great-grandfather had come over from Scotland or wherever he came, he might have stuck your father into Little League Baseball, even though he didn't play Little League Baseball growing up in France or Hungary or Scotland. And so it's a way for the kids to assimilate. And so it sort of hits on a lot of the nerves that, that I think would strike a chord with you, the idea that sports is a bridge between cultures, and it can really build community regardless of race or creed or gender. And so that's what's happening in Belfast. And it's not at the top levels. At Gaelic sports, the championship game with the senior men and women, they get 80,000 people, and it's live on television. And so it's a very big deal, but everybody plays as an amateur in Ireland. Even the coaches, they might get their gas money and their meals, but no one's on a salary that's playing Gaelic sports. And it's happening at the children's level. It's the youngest kids are coming in and being stuck into these Gaelic sports by willing parents wanting to keep the kids busy. So it's an interesting phenomenon.
One of the things that just popped up for me was hearing that there was some kind of, I would call, negative reaction to refugees and immigrants into Ireland. Did you see any of that, hear about that? What do you know about that?
Yeah, there is a little bit. Well, one of the things, just to back up a little bit, I think most of your listeners would know that at one time, Northern Ireland was involved in what they called the Troubles. The Catholics and the Protestants, or really the nationalists who wanted to be part of Ireland, and the Unionists and loyalists who wanted to remain loyal to the United Kingdom. There was sort of a tit-for-tat, low-grade civil war that killed nearly 4,000 people for over a 30-year period. The Good Friday Agreement that George Mitchell and Bill Clinton helped negotiate ended the fighting. 99% of the violence is gone now. It's really the model for the free world. But what I have found in the book is that the people that are running these Gaelic football clubs, or really anyone of our era, anyone who's over 40, was touched by the Troubles. They had an uncle killed, they had a friend killed, their neighbor got burned out of their house, that kind of thing. And so what I have found is the people that had been particularly on the nationalist Catholic side, they are very sympathetic to the immigrants. They've welcomed the immigrants in, and oftentimes I feel like part of the theory of the book that I didn't know when I started is this idea that the people have been through war, and been through violence are more likely to reach down and help a poor refugee. And so there's been a real warmth and welcoming on the Catholic side, which is the Gaelic football side of the community. The pushback has mostly come in Northern Ireland, has mostly come from the loyalist side. Now, down in the Republic of Ireland, it's more complicated because Conor McGregor, that great sportsman who's lost a civil trial for rape and is just sort of an obnoxious guy, he is leading he's one of the people leading a real anti-immigrant push. They're saying, Ireland for the Irish and that kind of thing. But to the people in Northern Ireland, they seem to, the Catholics particularly and the nationalists, they seem to get the idea that for years the Irish went all over the world and were pretty much welcomed. Yes, they had a hard time in America in the 1860s and 1880s and that, but the Irish have gone all over the world. The Brits have gone all over the world. At one point, something like a third of the world was controlled by the United Kingdom. And it just seems, I think it seems odd to me that they would be, holding up the stop sign for especially for war refugees. But there is starting to be a little bit of pushback, particularly in Dublin. And there were a few incidents in Northern Ireland. Like last summer, a Syrian grocery store got burned to the ground.
What's the name of your book? Do you have it picked out yet?
Well, the tentative title, the slogan for the Gaelic sports is the Gaelic Athletic Association is known as the GAA. And their slogan, which you see on bus stops and billboards all over Ireland and Northern Ireland, it's where we all belong. And it's a very welcoming kind of idea that, if you want to come play, it doesn't matter if you're any good or not, you can come play Gaelic sports if you find a local club. Something like 20% of the people in Ireland are involved in Gaelic sports, either as administrators or players, or they have children involved and that kind of thing. So it's a huge deal in Ireland and Northern Ireland. So the name of the book, it's a play on where we all belong. It's called Almost Like Belonging. And so there's an incident in the book that I write about where one of the Syrian players gets called, I can't say it on the air, but he gets called a name. And I asked about it afterwards. Like it seemed like a racial slur to me. They said, "Oh, no, that's something we call everybody, and that's something everyone gets called in Ireland." And I thought, geez, well, it's almost like he belongs. If he's getting hollered at, for rough play the way any Irish kid would get hollered at, it's almost like he belongs. So I like the title, Almost Like Belonging, and I'm trying to complete it now and get it off to. I've finally retained a good agent, and I'm going to try and get it off to her in the next few weeks.
Well, this is not your first book about Ireland. I was over there chasing around after you along with my wife, Paige, I think 2005, when you were coaching the Tralee Tigers in the Irish Professional Basketball League. And you were working on a book then called Paddy on the Hardwood.
Your photos graced that book. I'm sure your listeners would know. So it's the second book of mine or the first book of mine of a couple that have featured your photos. But yeah, and so that one was more my own personal journey and how I sort of made peace with my life in basketball and came to learn the Irish fiddle. This one this is a heavier book. It's not as personal to me, but it does seem like the immigration is a hot button issue all over the world now, and I don't think it's going to change, Michael, between climate change and war and famine and that kind of thing. And the other interesting thing about Northern Ireland is it was the least diverse place in the United Kingdom. And so only 4% of it's only 4% of the UK population, but now they're sending 20% of the immigrants, of the refugees, to Northern Ireland. And so that seemed like, I could just see people in London, they've always sort of pushed Northern Ireland to the side, the British government. And I could see them in London thinking, let's just send them to Northern Ireland. But for the most part, they've been welcomed. I'll tell you that the best part of it for me, and I think you'd agree with this, is the restaurants have improved dramatically in Northern Ireland now, because now there's Arabic food and there's different strains of Arabic food. There's African restaurants, and the food used to be pretty bland food all over Ireland, and each year it seems like it's getting more and more. There's getting to be more and more ethnic cuisine.
Well, I just one thing that I'm reminded of in talking to you, Russ, is when I was there in 2005, I was sort of impressed with how diverse it seemed to be. I saw a lot of African people and people who were certainly not white, Catholic Irish types.
Well, it's grown dramatically, Michael, because I know that I first went to Belfast for, when my wife got a Fulbright in poetry, and we went there in 2012, and then we went back. We lived there in 2015. We took our sabbatical year and spent it there, and that's when I first got the idea for the book. But I've noticed it now. Like, you'll just see downtown looks like it could be New York or Geneva, Switzerland, or
Chicago.
Yeah, or Chicago, yeah, right, or Chicago. But for me, I can't speak for everyone in Ireland, but for me, like growing up in Chicago, it was, Chicago is a city of immigrants, and it's been a great thing for Chicago. But the bridges between cultures have always been. We've talked about sports a little bit and food a little bit, but music can also be a bridge. And in this case, what I'm hoping for, fingers crossed, is that books can be a bridge. You can learn about what life in the Army is like by reading Catch-22, and you can learn about what life was like in the Great Depression from reading Grapes of Wrath. And there's a zillion examples of how books can sort of help bridge cultures. And so my hope is that between music and food and sport, those are the three big ones. But really, books can do the same thing.
Well, you have a strong sense of discipline. And, as a basketball player, as a basketball coach, as a professor of English, and as a writer, talk a little bit, Russ, about your writing. When do you write? What inspires you? What hinders you? What helps you? I'm doing some writing, and I want to thank you for that nice introduction you did to my new book, En La Frontera, which is mostly photographs from El Paso and Juarez. But you're a good writer. You're a disciplined guy. I'm looking for your tips, and I'm sure some other listeners are too.
Oh, well, but before I forget, Mike, I love that book, the book of photos and essays, and let's remind listeners before the end of the show when your exhibit is, because I'll be at that. It looks like
good. That's going to be on Friday, the 12th of September.
Yeah, but it's South
from
Halsted.
6 to 9. South Halsted, 2101 South Halsted. It's a Yuri Eichen gallery.
Yeah, because I was
South Halsted.
I was
Friday the 12th.
That's it. Because I was trying to picture, geez, I thought that's right by Armitage and Halsted. And I thought, wait a minute, that's South Halsted. So is it Pilsen then, or what is the name?
Yeah, it's in Pilsen.
Okay, yeah. So I will, about the writing stuff, I wouldn't have much advice. I mean, I can tell you quickly, my two strengths are that I have pretty good energy levels and pretty good discipline. But the other one is I do think I know a good story when I see one. And I don't think I'm a great writer. No one's saying, wow, what beautiful prose when they look at my writing. But I do think that I've stumbled on good stories, whether it's Nolan Richardson's life or the gun violence story with Sean Harrington in Chicago. And now in this case, the timing of it, my last book about the commercialization of college sports, the satire called Big Time, is at a time when sports has never been more commercialized. So I think the timing of this one might be good. It seems like a good time to be writing about immigration. And so I do think, for people, keep an eye out for a good story. And I do think that's, and the other thing is it's not my friend Alex Shakar told me this, the great Chicago writer. He said he feels like there's one sort of a parrot on your shoulder that's on my shoulder. It's probably a pigeon, but he says there's one parrot on your shoulder that's the creative muse, and the other one is sort of the nuts and bolts and the grammar and the discipline and people think that it's, I'm just so inspired because I'm an artist. But the truth is, a lot of what I do as a writer is just revise, and it's a slog. It can be, and it's an endurance test. And the problem, of course, is that you can work on it forever and it might not get published. And so there's a real, especially in fiction, where fiction is, you've got to finish the book before anyone will look at it. And so it's, I don't want to say it's a thankless job. I like writing, but the danger is you could work on a book and never get it published. And I don't know if I call it a danger, but you can feel like you've wasted your time if the book doesn't get published.
Well, you've had a bunch of yours published, and I'm sure you'll get the next one published. Let's go back to basketball for a minute. We're coming on the basketball season again. And in college sports, which was your focus, you coached both at UTEP in El Paso and up in Las Cruces at New Mexico State. we have this transfer portal now, and a lot of talk about how teams are buying up players, both in football and basketball. Any thoughts on that for the sports?
Yeah, I've got plenty. And in my last novel, the satire Big Time, addresses that in a satirical way. I've gotten, Michael, where I think, I look at the New York Times every day. I listen to a little bit of NPR, this and that. But I've gotten where I think Stephen Colbert is a better news source than the New York Times editorial page. There's something that satire can get at, but with college sports, the transfer portal I think is a bad idea because kids can switch teams at will. But it was the grown-ups that taught the kids to do that. The coaches switch teams at will, and so why can't the kids do? So I think much of the lessons were, I think I've heard our fans at New Mexico State complain about all the kids care about now is money. Well, they didn't invent that idea. It was the coaches doing that well before. And the boosters doing that well before. So I have mixed feelings about it. There's teams in America for basketball next year that will have a budget. They've got 12 or 13 players. I can't remember which, but they'll have a budget of $10 million for a team for a year of 21-year-olds. In a way, I think that's great. It'll put money in the African-American community, and it's about time. And no one was complaining when the coach, or few people were complaining except me, when the coach was making at Illinois, the Illinois basketball coach is probably making $4 or $5 million a year, and the players were getting room, board, tuition, and books. And no one was complaining. Few people were complaining about that. So it seems weird to me that people say, "Oh, now it's out of control. Now that we're paying the black kids." That seems sort of problematic to me. Where I have a bigger problem with it is I wonder if I'm a professor at University of Illinois and the star basketball player is in my creative writing class and he's making $800,000 a year and he doesn't come to class and he gets caught cheating or he doesn't do the homework and I've got to flunk him. Now, is the professor who's making $70,000 a year going to be willing to flunk the player who's making 10 times more than him? And so what I think has happened, in college sports is that sports has become more and more important. And by the way, Mike, I've heard, I know you have too, I've heard plenty of talk from the Trump administration about how these leftist institutions and that kind of thing. And I think you're more likely to get a Marxist class. I don't know how math would be a Marxist math class or a Marxist biology class. But I will say this. At the University of Illinois, I'm mentioning them because your listeners are from there. The president probably makes $800,000 a year. The basketball coach probably makes $5 million a year. Football coach probably $4 million a year. The deans are all making $300,000 a year. But if you send your kid to University of Illinois, you didn't, I know, but if you send your kid to University of Illinois, they're going to get taught by underpaid adjuncts that don't have health insurance their first couple of years. Now, I would ask you and ask your listeners, is that a Marxist system? Is that a leftist system where there's people making millions at the top, but the people doing the work are underpaid without health insurance? That seems to me to be the corporate model. And I get that, they're teaching feminist theory in one class on campus, or they're teaching the history of Marxism in another class. But the truth is that American institutions, particularly the state universities, for a long time have been very much more the corporate model. But what I do think happens at universities, it's performative. I've sat in faculty meetings where my colleagues who I would have thought were liberal and leftist decided not to give the vote to the instructors because they're just not, quote, ready for the vote, which sounded like Mississippi in 1962 to me. So I think there is sort of a leftist performative aspect to universities. And my guess is that most university professors would probably vote Democrat, depending on what department. Engineering and business certainly would tend to vote Republican. But what I'm telling you is that the American universities are not based on a leftist system. They're a corporate model. When there's that big of a salary discrepancy between the basketball coaches and the people teaching the classes, that's not a Marxist system.
Well, Russ, we're going to leave it at that. And this has been wonderful talking to you. Maybe I'll see you later today because you are still in Chicago. I was going to ask you about the concentration camp being built in El Paso on the Army base there, but we'll talk about that another time.
Well, I haven't been back to El Paso for a long time, but we should get Beto O'Rourke back on the show.
We should do that. We got a lot to do with Beto. Beto's on fire.